Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. It's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to restart this session with you, this series with you. And today we're going to talk about beauty. We're going to talk about beauty a little bit. And let's start with a little poll question to get our thoughts flowing a little bit together. Where do you find the most beauty? Is it in nature, in art, in human encounters, in inner spiritual experience? However you understand yofi, beauty, where do you tend to experience yofi? Where do you tend to experience beauty most powerfully? Okay, 50% say nature. Nobody said art. 25% say in human encounters. And 25% said inner spiritual experience. Very interesting. Okay, friends, on the question of beauty, whom we find beautiful, what beauty means to us, it's much more than surface level, of course. Our individual and societal concepts of beauty reveal not only what we find appealing and attractive, but also some of our deepest held values, perhaps. Both in the worlds of psychology and Torah, true beauty requires that we look deeper. In the 1970s, 3 scientists did a seminal study regarding how beauty affects perceptions of character. To conduct the experiments, researchers Karen Dian, Ellen Burscheid, and Elaine Walster first showed a group of college students various yearbook photos of people around the same age. The students were told to rank the images in terms of subjects' attractiveness. The researchers then grouped the photos into 3 designations: those deemed very attractive, those of average attractiveness, and those of less than average attractiveness. Next, they pulled together a second group of students. The second group of students, male and female, all undergraduates enrolled in an introductory psychology course at the University of Minnesota, were each given 3 envelopes. In each envelope, there was one photograph of a person who had been deemed very attractive by the previous group, one who had been deemed average, and one who had been deemed ugly. The students were then asked, based on the photographs alone, to assess the character of each of the 3 people they were shown. The paper in which the scientists' findings was published, What is Beautiful is Good, in 1972, concluded that people judged to be attractive were perceived as more warm, trustworthy, kind, interesting, altruistic, and friendly, among other positive traits. The university students in the study also assumed that the more attractive people in the photographs led happier lives, less likely to get divorced, more likely to be good parents, more likely to have high status jobs. In other words, people deemed to be beautiful are also deemed to be more virtuous, successful, and happier people. It's worth dwelling on the profound ramifications of the "what is beautiful is good" study. University students saw photographs of people to whom they had no connection. They did not know them, were given no information about them, and the photos themselves were yearbook photos, as opposed to photographs that might provide more visual context. The students in the study knew quite literally nothing about the people in the photographs, except what they looked like. And yet these students consistently looked at photos of people deemed to be less attractive and felt less trust for those people. They assumed the ugly people were less kind, less successful. They assumed they would be worse parents. What does it say about the ways we see or fail to see people who did not adhere to our concept of physical beauty? Over 50 years later, and that study remains incredibly influential, social scientists continue to debate the psychology behind the perceived connection between beauty and goodness. For example, in 2010, a psychology paper posited that the beautiful is good phenomenon may also be the result of the desire to become close to beautiful people and the projection of that desire onto beautiful people. However, while the reason behind the "what is beautiful is good" phenomenon can be debated, the existence of said phenomenon cannot be debated or doubted. Naturally, it's deeply problematic to approach physically beautiful people as if they were better people in general. All people should be treated equally. In America, we hold that truth to be self-evident. This is why we teach adages to our children, such as "don't judge a book by its cover." The Jewish equivalent of not judging a book by its cover can be found in Pirkei Avot, where Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi teaches us, do not look at the container, but rather inside the container. That said, we are all human. As such, we are drawn to beauty. It can take a conscious effort not to become completely distracted by a person's surface level appearance, but rather see them for their actions and character. For many Jews who identify as Haredi or some strain of the so-called ultra-Orthodox, great pains are taken in order to dress in a way that does not draw too much attention to physical appearance. The practice of modesty, known as tzniut, is best known for the ways it dictates how women cover their bodies and hair. However, tzniut also governs the appearance of men who adhere to the practice, such as wearing only black and white clothing and not shaving one's beard. The ultimate goal of Orthodox modesty guidelines is that both men and women will be able to see beyond physical appearance. As Rashi says in his commentary on Exodus, there's no finer quality than modesty. Or as we hear in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is with the modest. In fact, many Jewish practitioners of tzniut report feeling that in covering their bodies, they are in fact revealing their truest and deepest selves, allowing the outside world to get a true glimpse of who they really are. Now, many liberal people are critical of how ultra-Orthodox people dress, critiquing them as being boring or black and white or undynamic or out of touch. But I wish to present this opposite side of actually showing how the attempts to not be judged based on physical appearance, by hiding the beauty of a man's face with a beard, by covering the beauty of a woman's body and hair, is actually an attempt to remove bias, perhaps, an attempt to see people more deeply beyond that. At the opposite end of the spectrum from the Haredi view is the liberal approach to beauty, which celebrates beauty as a form of self-expression. Everything from makeup to clothing to hairstyles can be seen as a way to express something personal, right? What clothes one buys. Yes, an emphasis on physical appearance can be pure vanity, especially if the emphasis on physical appearance is merely done to gain favor or popularity. But attending to appearance can also be a celebration of the gift that is our physical bodies, bodies we are sworn to cherish. Recent studies have shown that Gen Z, in particular, is rewriting the rules of beauty, cultivating a concept of beauty that is more authentic, inclusive, and purposeful, perhaps. What we're pushing back against is the Greeks, not the Greeks of modern Greece, of course. I don't know so many of them, but rather the classical uh, uh, Hellenic value system, which celebrated one idealized form of beauty. For the ancient Greeks, beauty, or kalos, as it's known, was based on symmetry and proportion. For them, beauty was quite literally skin deep, rooted exclusively in attractiveness. In the realm of Jewish values, whether or not you adhere to the concept of modest dressing, we can agree that beauty is an interior concept, not purely a skin deep one. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs considers the Jewish versus the Greek approach to beauty in a commentary on a parsha from Exodus. Tetzaveh, which includes details of the attire to be worn by the high priest. Rabbi Sachs begin by questioning why this parsha would emphasize vestments. Who cares? Right? A breastplate, an ephod, a robe, a knitted tunic, a turban, and a sash. So boring. Is this merely vanity? After all, Judaism has a built-in skepticism when it comes to relying too much on appearances, right? Consider the example of Israel's first king, King Saul, who was described as regally tall, head and shoulders taller than the rest. The biblical irony, as Sachs points out, is that while Saul was physically tall, he was morally small. The difference between the Jewish approach to beauty and the Greek's approach is that in Judaism, beauty is understood as holding the possibility to inspire more noble ideas, as opposed to an ends that you worship in and of itself. Let me say this line again, because I think it's at the crux of the argument. That Jewishly, beauty is understood as holding the possibility to inspire more noble ideas, as opposed to beauty being an ends that you worship in and of itself. When seen through this lens, the high priest's beautiful vestments are not an ends to themselves. Wow, isn't that clothes beautiful? But rather art in the broader, more noble service of the divine, giving back as a votive offering to God a little of the beauty that we create, who has made in this created world. If the Greeks believed in the holiness of beauty, we as Jews believe in Hadrat Kodesh, the beauty of holiness. Say that again. The Greeks believed in the holiness of beauty. The Jewishly, we believe in the beauty of holiness. An example of this Hadrat HaKodesh comes to us in the song Eshet Chayil, which many traditional Jews sing on Friday night after Shalom Aleichem. It's the last chapter of the book of Proverbs. Taking its words from Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, the song reminds us that a woman's greatness is not in her vanity, but in her virtues, which are more precious than rubies. Beauty is illusory, we sing every Friday. It is for her fear of the divine that a woman is to be praised. It goes like this, if you recognize it. Isha Yirat Adonai Talel. So that's yeah, it's right there in the last line. Tenula mipriyadeh v'hallelujah b'sha'ari maseh. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. And yet nobody is indifferent to beauty, as we know. No one is indifferent to beauty, certainly not the Jews, even if we might profess such noble aspirations. Despite our cultural differences with the Greeks, Jews have traditionally acknowledged that the Greek language is exceedingly beautiful. The Mishnah states that it is permissible to write Torah scrolls in the Greek language. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel explains this on the grounds that the Greeks are descendants of Noah's son Japhet. The connection between the progenitor Japhet and beauty of the Greek language is strengthened when you consider that in Hebrew, Japhet is written as Japhet, Japhet is written as Japhet, calling to mind the Hebrew word for beautiful, which is Yafeh. Right? His name is beautiful, and he's attributed to this. Rashi confirms the beauty of the Greek language, writing that Greek is the most beautiful Yafeh language of all the languages of their heirs of Yafet. The language is beautiful, therefore, because it is sacred. Beauty also has practical implications. It matters greatly, for example, when attracting a spouse. Writing in 15th century Italy, the great halachic authority Rabbi Yosef Colon taught that the Torah requires us to marry a spouse we find attractive, someone we desire, someone who finds grace in your eyes. It's meaningful that you and your spouse find one another pleasing physically. I would not pretend any differently. But issues arise when physical attraction is the only thread holding together a couple as well, of course. Pirkei Avot reminds us that if love depends on one thing, then when the one thing ceases, love ceases. We all know that physical beauty is fleeting. Pirkei Avot considers the love between the biblical David and Jonathan to be pure and unending because it is not based on any one earthly thing, such as attractiveness or desire. By the way, there are some more progressive commentators who want to suggest that David and Jonathan had a gay sexual relationship. I'm not at all convinced by that, but that is one of the things they point to, is this deeper love of David and Jonathan. But I don't think the text, adequately demonstrates that. When we speak of attractiveness, it must be acknowledged that there is no one objective definition or concept of beauty. Beauty is always subjective. What attracts one person may leave another indifferent. As the Scottish philosopher David Hume wrote in the 18th century, beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty. What one person finds desirable, another might find boring or even repulsive. We all have different preferences when it comes to gender, presentation, style, body type, affect, etc. The science of attraction is a consummate area of inquiry. Darwin noted that distinctive beauty in nature, such as the peacock's tail, must have evolved as a result of the advantage it gave the animals in terms of attracting a mate. So too, in human evolution, psychologists have argued, must attractiveness be linked to our ability to attract mates? Many point out that from an evolutionary perspective, facial beauty would indicate health and reproductive fitness. Even in Torah, regarding Rachel being described as Yifat Mareh, literally beautiful of sight, the 16th century commentator, Rabbi Ovadia ben Yaakov Sforno, surmised this meant that Rachel's skin looked very healthy. Other explanations for the science of attraction are less intuitive. For example, a recent study indicates that we are attracted to averageness. Using a sample of 1,550 faces across 10 world populations from Vietnam to Brazil, scientists found that people with distinct, as opposed to typical, facial features were routinely deemed less attractive. Let me say that again. People who have a distinct look to them, as opposed to having typical facial features, are deemed less attractive. Something about looking average or looking typical is something deemed more attractive. Attraction is more than biological or sexual. There is an undeniable social component. Who are the kinds of people we trust? Who make us feel comfortable? Often, what attracts us is a sense of similarity. One study documented that we are attracted to people whom we perceive as having attitudes similar to our own. Another social element of beauty is how it has been used to oppress. For example, imposing white beauty standards on Black people, which is evident today, even today, as Black women are sometimes told their natural hair is unprofessional in the workplace. In as much as beauty has been part of oppression, it has also been part of resistance to that oppression, such as the slogan, Black is beautiful, which in the 1960s encouraged Black men and women to think of their natural features as beautiful. Black hair did not need to be relaxed. Dark skin did not need to be lightened. Discovering new beauty standards, for example, finding beauty in fatness, disability, and aging, allows everyone to be more free from the biases that prevent us from truly seeing one another, a bias that young is beautiful and old is not, or that being thin is beautiful and heavier is not. As the Haredi teach us through their emphasis on modest dressing, true beauty emerges from within. Consider the etrog. In Torah, the fruit we translate as etrog is called Pri Eitz Hadar, literally the fruit of the beautiful tree. In modern Hebrew, the word hadar has come to refer to citrus fruits collectively. In the Talmud, we see the rabbis puzzling over what constitutes a beautiful tree and why it had to be an etrog. Their conclusion is that Pri Eitz Hadar must be the etrog because the etrog dwells on the tree all year rather than only in one season. The rabbis reach this conclusion by parsing the word hadar as ha-dar, literally that which dwells. In the word dar, we find the same root as the Hebrew word dirah, or dwelling place, as well as dor, generation, ledor levador. The etrog tree is beautiful, therefore, because it endures. As Rashi says in his commentary on Leviticus 23, which commands us on the etrog, the fruit remains on the tree from one year to another. What a stunning inversion of beauty standards. Rather than beauty being rather than being beautiful because it is young and pleasing to the eye, the etrog is beautiful because of its age, because of its wisdom, and because of its endurance. May we all be inspired by the etrog to remove our own ageist biases when it comes to seeing beauty. When it comes to interrogating our own biases against beauty, there are real-world consequences. As we saw with the What is Beautiful is Good study, beauty isn't just about attraction, but about how we perceive a person's qualities. Therefore, it stands to reason that what we consider beautiful affects how we vote for political candidates, who we hire for jobs, etc. But as much as there are real-world consequences for our ideas of beauty, there are also spiritual consequences. After all, every human being is made b'tselem Elokim, in the image of the divine. Certainly, being physically beautiful doesn't make you more tselem Elokim than anyone else. We know this because God does not have a physical form. As Rashi reminds us, every physical body is finite, but the divine is the one without end, the Ein Sof, and so is therefore non-corporeal, non-physical. To be made in the image of God must then refer to some internal quality that we all possess that gives us dignity. You might argue that there is something godlike in beauty, for example, in beautiful art. But I posit that even in these cases, there's some kind of internality that is shaping the external, not the reverse. Beauty always begins within and emanates externally. So what about ugliness? The Talmud tells a story about Rabbi Elazar rolling along the banks of a river and coming upon an exceedingly ugly man, greeted him courteously. Greetings to you, my rabbi. But rather than return the ugly man's greeting, Rabbi Elazar rebuffed him. Worthless person, how ugly you are! Are all the people of your city as ugly as you? The man replied, you should go and say that to the craftsman who made me. How ugly is the vessel you made? It is as if the man is saying, you don't insult me. I was made in God's image. No, you're insulting God. This Agadah, this story, shows us that it is a desecration of God's image for us to let what we see what we see externally dictate what we perceive in internality. In fact, after realizing his mistake, Rabbi Elazar immediately prostrated himself before the man and begged for forgiveness. This is one of the great things of our tradition. On the one hand, it's astonishing to me to imagine someone who professes to be a holy, wise person speaking like this. I can't even imagine any person of virtue talking like this. And then we say this is one of our sages. On the other hand, how often do you see people today, literally prostrating themselves, begging for forgiveness after insulting someone? So I think part of the greatness of our tradition is that we have such flawed people, but also people who are very aware of their flaws, right? And willing to, address them. Okay, friends, moving towards a conclusion. The theology of ugliness. What a great phrase, right? The theology of ugliness is such that when we see a person as ugly, it exposes a shortcoming in ourselves that has to be psychologically addressed. Like Rabbi Elazar, we have to do teshuvah on some level when we see ugliness. Because the problem is not with the other person we deem ugly, but with our own failure to see that deepest dignity in that person. On some level, there is no ugliness if we are truly in tune with the divine in each person and ourselves, however we understand that deepest inner dignity. In psychological studies and in Torah sources alike, we find that beauty is less a physical quality of any one person and more a question of perception. If we know how to see the world deeply connected to these holy sparks in every person, we will be prepared to see it in its full beauty. None of us can be indifferent to our physical appearance. All of us want to be found beautiful. So while I will not charge anyone to ignore physical attractiveness, I do charge us to remember that by enhancing our character and inner world, we will be enhancing a true and enduring form of beauty. Okay, dear friends, this is the psychology of beauty and the theology of beauty and the theology of ugliness. And I would love to hear some thoughts from you. Yes, hi, Sarah.
Good morning, afternoon, whatever. So several things struck me, lots of things struck me as you spoke. One was just in the study, the Beautiful is Good study. I'm curious to know if they found a difference in the perception of males' beauty and whether that average guy would still have tremendous success versus the woman who has to be beautiful. We know that if you're going to be elected president in this country, you have to be over 6 feet. Tall people are more likely to be elected. I mean, as I started thinking about all of those things, I thought, and in our country or in the US, because I know we have other folks, when we look at famous stars in the theater, in movies, whatever, they have to have that attractiveness quality, as opposed to other countries where there are people without teeth, who are stars because they have a quality that exceeds beauty. And does that mean that in the US, we simply invest in the superficial, which is why our whole cosmetic surgery industry is so enormous. The story about the etrog is just really touched me, because while you said, these are all the qualities, I thought, okay, but the beauty of the etrog is that its beauty endures. It's not that it endures so much as its beauty on the tree endures. And for how many of us is that true? We may endure, and that inner beauty endures, but walking around, that's not what people see, which is sad, but it's what is. So fascinating. I really liked that last David Hume quote. That was exceptional. And if I particularly like also, if I see ugliness, it's really my failure. I'm the one who is ugly.
Beautiful, Sarah. Thank you for all those reflections. Just before we go to David here, who I see is unmuted, um, I guess one thing that you reminded me of, I was in Target with my kids on Sunday, and I noticed that the images of people they had wearing clothes were both racially diverse. The men and women in the images had very different body sizes, not just thin. And I even noticed a child's face that was scarred and burnt in a way that was kind of surprising. I don't know if Target made some moral commitment to diversity around how they think of beauty, or if this is just marketing. This is proven to be a smarter marketing rather than just showing models, showing, I don't know what motivated that, but I was kind of struck noticing that, because there are other companies that make a very different choice, that there's only a certain type of model wearing clothes in the stores. So yeah, it is something to be aware of. And you're right, in voting as well, in terms of height of men. And I'm not aware of, in that study, them exposing any differences along gender lines, but I'd have to dive in a little deeper, because I think that is a really interesting point. So Sarah, thanks so much for those ideas. Hi, David.
Hey, y'all. I was going to do just a little pushback on David and Samuel, David and Jonathan. So Samuel 18, when David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan's soul became bound up with the soul of David. Jonathan loved David as himself. Jonathan took off the cloak and tunic he was wearing and gave them to David, together with his sword, bow, and belt. I think there is the possibility, we don't know, we don't know if they're what we think. I think David is a historical figure. They've found things in Jerusalem with his emblem and everything, but we don't know what kind of love or friendship. What we do know, though, is throughout the centuries, all of the academics, all of the clerics have said it can't be sexual also in nature. It has to be platonic. It has to be a friendship, just because the other is so ugly or different or whatever, forbidden. So I tend to go with the words, loving someone as your own soul. It's a very intimate connection. I know that.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for bringing us that verse, and thank you for for reminding us of that deeper love and that connection. And I think that there's a whole world of possibility there. And if anyone hasn't read Rabbi Steve Greenberg's Wrestling with God and Men, it is a book I recommend. Um, for traditional Jews who are gay, it's been a powerful book for them. Essentially, his argument. So, if someone is Jewishly liberal, they might just say, "Well, I don't think the text is from God, so I'm not troubled by a verse prohibiting homosexual activity." Right? But for someone who treats the text as having some divinity, they have to grapple with that prohibition. And Rabbi Steve Greenberg, who is an Orthodox rabbi and a gay man, the way that he addresses that issue is, he says, yes, that verse, the prohibition stands, but it was limited to a context where older men dominated younger men and were physically aggressive with them. And that's the type of homosexual behavior that is prohibited, an exploitative, aggressive type. That's what the Torah is referring to. Obviously, a consensual, mutual, loving relationship um, that that is outside of that context would not apply. And I believe in Rabbi Greenberg's book, he does touch upon David and Jonathan possibly having a physically intimate and spiritually intimate relationship. So yes, David, thank you for bringing that issue back up. Okay, who else wants to hop in here? Anything on the topic of beauty, the psychology of beauty? Yes. Hi, Steve.
I think my sense of beauty has changed as I've gotten older. Excuse me. When I was a young man, no, that's the beginning of a song. When I was young, beauty to me was basically nature and music and girls, nothing else, maybe sports. I was driven in almost everything I did by those three categories. Now that I'm much, much older and have learned a few things, beauty is so much different. I am not really compelled in any way or lifted in any way by nature. I can look at something and say, nice, pretty, smells good, calming. But to me, now, beauty is number one, epiphany. If I have an epiphany for something, as pluralism, the idea of pluralism has had for me, I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world. I never thought of it. Now I feel whole and inspired and ready to march forward. I think relationships are beautiful. I love seeing little kids playing with each other, older folks arm in arm looking at each other. It is fascinating to me and how enervating it is. And I also think beauty is joy. Looking at the joy of other people. I don't feel joy that much in my life except regarding my kids, but joy is so compelling to me. Last night, my neighbors, much younger, upper 20s, low 30s, showed me their new dog. And there was so much happiness and so much joy, I could have cried. It was sensational. So, without going too much far afield, I would say epiphany, relationships, and joy. Relationship meaning chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek, strengthen and be strengthened by, to me, your relationships. Those are the three things that are compelling to me in terms of beauty.
Awesome. Awesome, Steve. Thank you so much. It is so easy for us to assume that people like what we like and don't like what we like. My wife always mocks me that I believe that nobody likes dry white wine because I think dry white wine tastes so bad. Everyone clearly must like dry red or sweet white, but everyone must hate dry white. And then I can't possibly imagine someone who could like dry white wine. It's just outside of the realm of my own intellectual capability to imagine such a thing. And it's true too. Some people love nature so much that they really can't imagine someone not being just completely overwhelmed by the beauty of sunsets or walking in the forest or the like. And we're just wired so differently. Other people, they're so bored with people, right? But with you, relationships and talking to someone is so deep, or epiphany and joy, these types of things that other people, they want to be isolated with art or nature to find it. And it's so different. And so this is just such a great reminder of another type of pluralism here at VBM, not just religious pluralism and political pluralism, but the pluralism of beauty, right? That one of the things that happens in our media age is that we're kind of constantly told what's beautiful. right? Through the arts and through marketing and the like. And for us to kind of reconnect with our deeper selves and what we find beautiful, to be overwhelmed by it and awed by it and inspired by it. And just as we've talked about, like meditating on food, like accessing the depth of the ability to eat and enjoy food, so too, like being just wowed by however we experience beauty, and being intrigued as to why we are reacting to people in the grocery store, if anybody goes to the grocery store anymore. Why we react to people differently based on their appearance, and how we can, check on that a little bit. So Steve, thank you so much for sharing your own perspectives on that. Hi, Ken, you still with us?
Yes. Yeah,
Hi, Ken.
it's always hard to find that unmute button.
Of course, yeah.
I guess I've been confused by this whole session, starting from the question that you asked that I was unable to answer, and just the nature of the question made me go look to the dictionary for what beauty actually means in a dictionary sense, and it in, say, the Cambridge Dictionary, it says it's the quality of being pleasing and attractive, especially to look at. And so part of my confusion is we use beauty in ways that are outside its actual meaning. If beauty is simply attractiveness or being pleasing to look at, then the idea of beauty within is really a separate concept. It's not really comparable to the original meaning. And so part of it is, I guess, teleological in the sense that it's simply a meaning of the definitions get confused. And when we use words to mean more than they are meant to mean, because we use them as analogies from one to the other, then the discussion becomes less clear, and we're not really focusing on what the original question was. Because your original study, it's clear that all the participants, and I mean, having been a college student roughly at the same time as that study, I can understand exactly what the students who were answering that question meant. They understood it to mean physical attractiveness. They weren't looking at anything else. And so it's hard for me to think about using inner beauty as being anything other than an analogy to the beauty. It's something that is pleasing, but is inside of us, but it's not attractiveness. And so I do think part of it is we ought to use words carefully. And so I'm certainly not going to get into an argument as to which is more important. I think at the end, we all agree that being a good person is more important than being physically attractive, and that there is really no particular correlation between the two, regardless of what people presume about other people from the way they look. But I do think that probably is true, that in general, if we have an adverse reaction to the way somebody looks, we probably make assumptions as to their inner goodness, because that justifies our negative reaction to the way they look. But it does get complicated when at least I have a hard time, working through the definitions. So
Great. Yes. I'm so glad you said that, Ken, because just like when we talk about love, classically there's four different types of love. The way I love pizza is different from how I love my mother, is different from how I love God. They're not comparable. It's almost a different word. So
Right.
too, the
And in
word of
Greek, it
beauty.
is.
Yeah, right. Classically, we have three different types of beauty: of the political, the artificial, and the genuine. Others have seven different categories: the extravagant, the transgressive, the emergent, the transformative, the ethereal, the intricate, and the elemental. And so these are like completely different categories. And then we get to today where we talk about the beauty industry. Well, what are we talking about? The beauty industry, right? And then philosophically, they distinguish between the classical, the idealist, and the hedonist. The idealist beauty is something abstract, and think about Plato and kind of the forms, um, as opposed to the classical, which is kind of in the statue, in the physical flesh. And then there's the hedonist, which is a whole other sense. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that it'd be interesting to look at some other studies of beauty beyond the ones of attractiveness, to think more about how psychologically are we lumping these categories of beauty together. In any way, is physical attractiveness in a person, in the realm of neuroscience, linked to how I experience a sunset, or linked to how I experience a Picasso, or linked to how I view what Steve calls an epiphany, right? Are these completely different, experiences that we're using the same term for? Or is there something similar of like you said, pleasing? Something feels pleasing to me to encounter. Um, the other thing I would say psychologically that I assume would resonate is that based on our mood and based on our current experience, we will experience beauty differently as well, right? And so, how does the context shapes what we find beautiful? I think salespeople who work in the beauty industry are very aware of this, in terms of how to make someone comfortable in the hospitality industry. Um, do we buy what's beautiful versus comfortable, and how are those related? Okay, Sarah, back to you.
I want to riff on Ken's questions too, because I realized it wasn't until my 20s when I took my first journey up to the Adirondacks that I felt that sense of awe and wonder and the beauty of these mountains. And so as Ken was asking, I realized for me, beauty has something to do in my mind or heart with awe, that which brings me to a sense of awe is really beautiful to me. And that when I parse that out a little further, I get to, well, that awe is about my connectedness to the infinite, and how I am touched in that moment, that I am a part of this and it's a part of me, which goes to Steve's relationship piece, but differently. For me, that's where beauty resides. And I don't know how that strikes you, Ken, but that was kind of the elements and where I am now in terms of, as I've evolved in sense of beauty, of what beauty is in my life. And I had a really hard time with that whole question also. I was like, yeah, those things are really beautiful, but it's because for me, many of those elements bring me awe. When I have that epiphany, when I have that moment of being truly aligned with the Shekinah and we are one, I'm in total awe. And for me, that's a beautiful moment. So
Thank you,
I'm
Sarah.
done again.
I'm so glad you brought up awe, because the word in Hebrew for awe, as many know, is yirah, and yirah is connected to ro'eh. Ro'eh means to see, and awe is connected to C, that the understanding is that beauty is something experienced through the sense of sight. Now, there'd be an interesting study around blindness. How do people who experience blindness talk about beauty differently? What does beauty, how is beauty experienced for those, how is yira experienced for those who don't have roeh? And that's something I don't know anything about. David, did you unmute again?
I was
Great.
going to riff on Sarah's idea and
Great, please do.
Oh yeah,
Please
Steve,
do.
I love your list of little kids, dogs, joy, nature. I think in our older years, this is the time to embrace beauty, embrace all of these things, earthly delights, spiritual delights. When we're working hard, some of us don't have time for this, but to take a moment and really enjoy that chocolate fudge sundae, enjoy the laughter of your grandkids. It's not that it's never been out there, but now we have the chance to grab hold of it. So thank you for your list.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful to spend an hour thinking about beauty with you. And not only in the realm of justice and how we think about biases and discrimination, but also in the sense of our own actualization and our enhancement of the aesthetic, and how we might experience that as something that can inspire noble commitments and attachments. So I wish everyone a beautiful day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.